I am 62 years old and I have about $90,000 left from a $350,000 retirement fund. The rest is gone. The reason I still have $90,000 is because I ran an experiment about 8 months in that I want to tell you about today. I told Joy I had lost everything. I told her my investments had collapsed, that I was broke, that I might have to go back to the States. I made it convincing. I acted distressed. I needed to see what she would do. What happened in the 48 hours after I delivered that news is what I am going to walk you through right now. And before I do, I want you to know something. Being right about someone, being proven correct about every suspicion you had been talking yourself out of for months, is not a victory. It is one of the loneliest experiences a man can have. If you are a man over 50, dating or considering a relationship with a younger Filipina woman, subscribe to this channel right now before you keep watching, because I am going to show you how to run the test that tells you the truth. And I am going to tell you exactly what it feels like when the truth is precisely as bad as you feared it would be. I want to tell you about Joy at her best because you need to understand what I was holding on to when I ran that experiment. We had been together for about 8 months at that point. 8 months of something that felt, on the surface, exactly like what the Philippines travel channels and the expat forums had promised. Joy was 26. She was from a small barangay in the Visayas, one of those province towns where everybody knows everybody and the church is the center of social life. She had a quality I can only describe as a patient warmth. Not loud affection, not performance. A steady, quiet attentiveness that felt like genuine care. She called me in the morning to make sure I had eaten. She noticed when I seemed tired and asked about it without being pushed. She remembered small things I mentioned weeks earlier and brought them back in conversation in ways that made me feel truly listened to. I had been in Columbus, Ohio long enough to know that this kind of attention was rare. And I will be honest with you, I was paying for it. Not literally, not in a direct transactional way, but the relationship ran on my money in a way that I understood intellectually from the beginning and emotionally refused to accept. The apartment in Makati was mine. The food was mine. When we went out, it was mine. The monthly allowance I gave her for transportation and personal expenses was mine. I told myself this was normal. That in a country with this kind of income gap between a retired American and a 26-year-old local woman, of course the financial dynamic was uneven. That is true. The income gap is real and the cultural expectations around it are real. What I was slow to interrogate was whether that financial dynamic was the foundation of the relationship or just an incidental feature of it. 8 months in, the emergencies had added up to about $22,000 above my regular living expenses. A series of family needs, medical costs, the usual pattern that men in my situation will recognize. None of it had felt alarming in the moment. It was spread out over time, each item explained in specific human detail, each attached to a face I had seen and a story I had heard. But I had started doing the math late at night when I could not sleep. $22,000 in 8 months. At that rate, my savings had a runway of maybe 9 or 10 years before they were gone. I would be 72 and broke, and Joy would be 34. And what then? I started watching her more carefully. The phone, always angled away from me. The excuses for certain evenings, always soft and reasonable. The way some questions got deflected with warmth instead of answered with information. I was not certain. I was not ready to say the word I did not want to say. But I knew I needed the truth, so I decided to find it the hard way. I spent a week planning the experiment. I am a logistics man, 32 years of working backward from a required outcome. The outcome I needed was the truth, and I needed it without confrontation, without accusations I could not prove, without drama. I built the scenario carefully. I started by telling Joy I was concerned about some investments back in the States, mentioned it casually over dinner, planted the seed and let it sit for a few days. A financial advisor I had been in contact with had flagged a potential issue with a particular fund. Then, on a Thursday evening, I told her the news had come back bad. The fund had collapsed. I was going to lose a significant portion of my savings. I made my face do what it needed to do. I have never been an actor, but grief is not hard to perform when you are grieving something adjacent to what you are describing. I was grieving the real possibility that everything I feared might be true. She held my hand. She looked concerned. She asked questions. How much? Was I certain? Was there a lawyer who could help? She said all the right things, and she said them in exactly the right order. And that was the first sign I was dealing with someone who had, at some level, prepared for this kind of conversation. Because the questions she asked had a practiced efficiency that I noticed even through my own performance. I let the scenario sit for 3 days. I let her see me distracted and quiet. I stopped initiating financial discussions. I canceled a restaurant plan we had made, telling her I was watching my spending now until I understood the full picture of my losses. On day 4, she mentioned gently that her mother's blood pressure medication had run out and she did not have money to cover it. 2,300 pesos, about $40. Here is what you need to understand about that moment. Before this experiment, Joy had never needed to ask me for $40 for her mother's medication, because $40 was nothing in the context of what I was providing. The fact that she asked for it specifically, delicately, immediately after I told her my money was in trouble, told me something precise and ugly. It told me she was monitoring the financial situation actively, that she understood there was a tap, and the tap was connected to my account, and she needed to know whether the tap was still running. I sent the $40. I wanted to see what came next. I pulled back on everything else over the following week. I mentioned I might need to move out of the Makati apartment for something cheaper. I stopped giving the monthly allowance, explaining I needed to restructure until I understood the full extent of my losses. The warmth did not disappear immediately. That is important to say. There was no sudden coldness, no dramatic scene. It was more like a slow dimming, 1 or 2 degrees a day, so gradual that if I had not been watching for it, I might not have noticed until it was much colder. By day 12 of the experiment, I had not seen her in 4 days. By day 15, the calls had dropped to a single brief check-in every other day. I sat in my apartment in the specific humid quiet of a Manila afternoon and understood exactly what I was watching. On day 16, I called her. Voice call, not video. I told her the situation was worse than I had initially thought, that I was going to have to go back to Columbus, Ohio, that I would be staying with my daughter, and I did not know when or if I could return to the Philippines. I told her I was sorry. I told her I loved her. I listened to her response with complete attention. She said she was sorry too. She said she hoped things would work out for me. She said she would pray for me. And then she said, very gently, that she thought maybe it was best if we took some space, to think about things, to figure out what made sense going forward. She said it like she was the reasonable one, the one managing a difficult situation with maturity and grace. It took about 3 minutes. 3 minutes to close 8 months of what I had told myself was a genuine relationship. The call ended and I sat there and I ran the calculation. 8 months, $22,000 in family emergencies and support above my baseline, roughly $40,000 in living costs, the apartment, food, transportation, her allowance, gifts, trips, about $62,000 total. She had called me my Robert in that soft, particular way she had. She had held my hand in church. She had cooked food in my kitchen. She had introduced me to her grandmother. And when she learned the money was gone, it took 15 days for the relationship to become something she needed to take space from. I want you to hear the precision of that timeline. Not because I want sympathy, though I will not pretend the memory does not sit heavy, but because the timeline is the data, and the data told me everything I needed to know. I sat in that Makati apartment for 2 days after the call. I did not eat much. I slept a lot. At some point in those 2 days, something settled in me. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness that follows a very loud noise. The grief I felt was not for joy. It was for the version of the relationship I had needed to believe in. I had built a mental architecture around what we had, and that architecture was gone. I mourned it. Honestly, some part of me still does. But I got on a flight 2 weeks later with $90,000 I still had because I had been careful enough and suspicious enough to stop before everything was gone. I want to be careful about how I frame what I learned because I do not want you to take the wrong lesson from this story. The lesson is not to avoid Filipino women. The lesson is not to trust no one and live like a closed fist. The lesson is much more specific than that. When the financial foundation of a relationship is as asymmetric as it is between a retired Western man and a young woman in a developing country, the relationship contains a structural vulnerability. That vulnerability can be exploited by someone who is motivated and skilled enough to exploit it. Joy may have had moments of genuine warmth. I cannot know for certain what was real and what was performance. What I do know is that the warmth had a price below which it ceased to function. And learning the existence of that price changes everything you believed about what you had built. The experiment also taught me something about myself that was almost as hard to sit with as Joy's departure. I wanted the relationship to be real so badly that I had built an entire life around protecting that belief. The money I sent to her family was, at least in part, money I was sending to preserve my own narrative. Because as long as I was the generous American boyfriend taking care of her family, the relationship had a story that felt worth being inside. When I stripped the money away, even in pretense, I was stripping away my own investment in the fiction. That was the real grief. I am in Ermita, Manila now, in a $10 a night room. The $90,000 is in a U.S. account I manage online. I live off my Social Security, $1,100 a month, and I am making it work. Not comfortably, but I am making it work. Here is my direct advice to you if you are in a relationship with a significantly younger Filipina woman and you have doubts you have been suppressing. Run the test. Not to be cruel, not to manufacture a dramatic exit, but to give yourself the information you need to make a real decision. Stage a financial setback. Make it believable. Watch what happens to the warmth over 2 weeks. Watch what happens to the calls, the visits, the attentiveness. If the relationship survives a realistic financial downturn, if she stays present and concerned and connected to you as a person rather than as a source of income, you have something real and worth protecting. If it does not survive, you have just saved yourself potentially everything you have. The test costs you 2 uncomfortable weeks. My alternative cost $62,000 and 8 months of my life. I got out with something left. I know men who did not run the test until there was nothing remaining. Not $90,000, not a safety net, just a Social Security check and a cheap room, and the specific bitterness of a man who did not want to be right, but was. Subscribe to this channel. Every video is a specific piece of education for a man who is serious about protecting what he spent his whole working life building while still making a real life in Southeast Asia. I am not here to frighten you away. I am here to make sure that if you come prepared and clear-eyed. Because the dream is possible, but only if you are willing to see what is actually in front of you instead of what you need it to be. There is one more thing I want to say before you go. After Joy left and I had processed the experiment and understood the results, I did something that surprised even me. I started talking to other expats here in Manila. Guys my age, older, some younger, American, British, Australian. And what I discovered is that almost every one of them had a version of the joy story. The names were different, the provinces were different, the specific family emergencies had slight variations, but the structure was identical every single time. The slow build of warmth, the gradual financial drain disguised as need, the property maneuver, the eventual discovery, the exit. It is not random, it is not coincidence. It is a system that has been refined through repetition and shared knowledge in certain communities. I am not saying everyone operates this way. I am saying the system exists, it is practiced, and it specifically targets men with money who are emotionally ready to believe in something. Knowing that the system exists does not make you paranoid, it makes you rational. The paranoid version of me would have never come to the Philippines at all. The rational version of me would have come here with better information and kept $90,000 in his pocket instead of $62,000 poorer after 8 months. The information exists. It is in videos like this one, in expat forums, in the hard-won knowledge of men who already went through it. Use it. Do not let pride or hope or the specific loneliness of being 62 and invisible in America make you skip the research. The Philippines can be a good place for a man like you. I genuinely believe that. But only if you arrive as a student of the reality, not a customer of the fantasy.